Hello everyone, I'm Matt Mitchrich, the Alternate Historian. Something looks different. Oh well, time for another Patreon-sponsored video, this one from Mark Hopkins, who wants me to ask, what if Antarctica had a native population? Now in our timeline, there's a very good reason why Antarctica doesn't have a native population. It's cold as hell! Even modern 20th century proposals to colonize the continent by using atomic-powered dome cities or mining towns dug underneath the ice to reach the mineral-rich mountains inland, while sounding really awesome, had never gotten off the shelf. Today, the few thousand scientists who live in Antarctica do so temporarily, and usually only during the summer. But what if Antarctica wasn't so cold? What if you could live at the bottom of the world? Before we continue, I have to admit from the start that this is pretty implausible. Any timeline that features a greener Antarctica will require intervention by alien spacebats, since any meaningful change to the continent's environment would need to take place in the distant past. Plus, a warmer Antarctica would mean higher sea levels, and who knows whether humans would even exist on an Earth with so many early geological changes. Nevertheless, the idea of an Antarctica where humans can live out in the open does fascinate alternate historians. In a previous video, I mentioned D. Waldron's Green Antarctica timeline on alternatehistory.com, where Antarctica never fully glaciated, and prehistoric humans from Australia colonized it. Then there is the collaborative Great White South timeline on the Alternate History Wiki, created by Nuclear Vacuum, which has a similar geological point of divergence as Green Antarctica, except the native population that settles it isn't a brutal sadistic mess. So since people like talking about Antarctica colonized by humans, and since someone is paying me to do just that, here's my take on the concept. Okay, first, we need to make Antarctica green, and believe it or not, that might not be hard to do. Scientists have already observed large quantities of moss growing across the Antarctic Peninsula due to rising temperatures caused by global warming. Some even predict that by the 22nd century, West Antarctica could experience similar weather conditions that we see today in Alaska, northern Canada, Iceland, and northern Scandinavia. This might even allow for some farming. So without changing the rest of the planet in any meaningful way, I'm going to hold the fast forward button down on Antarctica and have that happen much earlier and give it the tundra you would find in the far north. In fact, Antarctica already has some tundra-like geography, primarily in the Antarctic Peninsula and nearby islands, which contains rocky soil that can support plant life. Presumably, whatever warms Antarctica up in this scenario, and I'm leaving it to the ASBs for now, would leave much of the continent near the coast with land like this. Such a continent would support several different flowering plant species, birds, and sea mammals, some which would take a very divergent evolutionary path. Due to Antarctica's isolation, however, it's unlikely any large mammal species would be found in this alternate Antarctica, at least until humans arrived. Speaking of humans, the good thing about the tundra is that it's not inhospitable to human life. Cultures like the Inuit and the Sami have both made their lives out in the tundra, but who would do it in Antarctica in this timeline? Well, personally, I think a good candidate are the Fuegians of Tierra del Fuego. In Great White South, they were the culture that colonized Antarctica, and I still believe they are the best option. Not only do they live close to Antarctica, but coastal Fuegians have a history of using canoes, and it's possible some intrepid explorer might come upon Antarctica. On top of all that, there are only a couple thousand Fuegians left in the world today. Many were killed by diseases as contact with Europeans was made, but some deaths, such as what happened during the Selknam genocide, were caused by large ranchers paying bounties to kill Fuegians so they could get their land. Unfortunately, I really can't change the past, but we can imagine an alternate history where some Fuegians managed to migrate to this greener Antarctica and survive in larger numbers by the present day. So what would Fuegian Antarctica look like? Well, it would be difficult to speculate as time went by, since whole new tribes, cultures, and nations could arise as Fuegians spread across the continent, but we can make some educated guesses. First, most Fuegians would probably live in the Antarctica Peninsula, since it's already the most hospitable part of Antarctica in our timeline, and would be even more so in this alternate timeline. Some groups might fan out and settle other parts of the continent, but my guess is they would hug the coast and avoid the still icy interior. They would primarily be hunters and gatherers. Fishing would be extremely important, and seals and penguins would be hunted as well. Whaling would be important, since in our timeline, Fuegians would harvest whales that became stranded on shore, but these alternate Fuegians may actively hunt the creatures. Presumably, the Antarctic Fuegians would live a nomadic lifestyle and move to wherever the best hunting and fishing was. Getting through the winter may be tough. It's probable that in the warmer months, the Fuegians would use shelters made from animal skins, but in the winter months, they may rely on temporary shelters made of snow, much like the Inuit of Canada. Other aspects of this alternate Fuegian culture become difficult to speculate on as time goes by. Things like politics or religion are hard to comment on with any certainty, and I certainly don't know enough about the Fuegian culture in the first place to make even a remotely plausible guess. But I can say one thing with 100% certainty. At some point, Europeans are going to discover Antarctica and screw everything up. Now, in our timeline, Antarctica wasn't first sighted by Europeans until 1820, and even then, the first confirmed landing didn't happen until 1895. Antarctica's isolation was a factor for this lack of interest in the continent, but with a less harsh environment, Europeans might have a more direct involvement in the shape of Antarctica earlier on, which would be bad news for the Fuegians. Nevertheless, even this alternate Antarctica would still be isolated, and the distances involved means many Europeans would be more interested in the other warmer continents, rather than the vast tundra and ice of this new continent. Thus, Antarctic Fuegians would have time to recover from European diseases and might not see such significant population decline as we saw in this timeline. Plus, the Antarctic environment, while better than our timeline, would not be that great, so it's unlikely you would see ranchers wanting to kill off the natives. Thus, the Antarctic Fuegian tribes might still exist in large enough numbers to effectively preserve their culture. You still would see some early European colonies set up along the coast for fishing and whaling, but these would be small and isolated. These early settlers would trade with the native Fuegians and even intermingle with them, producing mixed-race children. New animals would be brought down that could handle the environment, which would significantly alter Fuegian culture as land mammals started appearing in an environment that was not prepared for them. Now, assuming the broad strokes of history still happen, at some point European nations will try to gobble up as much of Antarctica as they can by the late 19th and early 20th century. In our timeline, many countries lay claims to Antarctica. Leopold Amory of Britain even proposed annexing the entire continent to the British Empire, and that was when the continent was still covered in ice. Thus, with a warmer Antarctica involved, I could see a greater interest in claiming parts of Antarctica. While Europeans would still be more interested in places like Africa and Asia, they would plant a flag where they could, causing Fuegians to find their ancestral homeland split by arbitrarily drawn lines, dividing the tribes and making them subjects of countries they might never have heard of. A more habitable Antarctica means that it is more likely to be exploited economically. In our timeline, the Antarctic Treaty of 1959 severely limits the ability of countries to economically exploit the continent. But I don't see such a treaty being signed in this alternate timeline. We know there are deposits of coal, iron ore, copper, platinum, nickel, and gold in Antarctica, and it's likely someone would try to mine them eventually. Perhaps they would hire the Fuegians to mine the minerals, or they might bring a third party in and push the Fuegians off somewhere else. Some Fuegians might even give up their nomadic lifestyle and move to the coastal towns, creating an entirely different type of Antarctic Fuegian. Oil might even become an important export of this alternate Antarctica, as the milder weather would make it easier to reach the oil and natural gas fields in the Ross Sea. Such resources would make the colonies and nations that arise in this alternate Antarctica quite wealthy. They may even be more likely to invest in green energy, since Antarctica is one of the windiest places on Earth, making it a great place to erect large wind farms. But I doubt the Antarctic Fuegians would see much direct benefit. I hate to be cynical, but the native Fuegians would likely never have that large a population, and given their nomadic lifestyle, they would probably not have an organized nation state to represent their interests. They would instead be minorities in their own continent, living in the wilderness, trying to keep their traditional lifestyle, or else living in the coastal towns in de facto segregated neighborhoods. Sorry to end this scenario on such a down note, but I can't help but feel that the Antarctic Fuegians, if they do survive, would have a similar experience that most native populations met when a settler population arrived. On the plus side, there would be more Fuegians around, and there's still the possibility that some of the nations on this greener Antarctica may create autonomous homelands for the Fuegians, like Nunavut in Canada. It's still not a great timeline for the Fuegians, but when compared to our own, it could be a lot worse. Well, that is all to say on the subject. If you like what I do, please comment, subscribe, share this video, support me on Patreon. I'm Matt Mitrovich, the Alternate Historian. Bye.